Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Cota Capital podcast. My name is Simone. Today with me there is Don Song, co-founder of Oasis Labs. We're both based in the Bay Area, as you can probably see from Don's background. And because of it's 2020 and COVID, we have to do this online, of course. We cannot meet in person. Don, thank you very much for spending some time with me to talk about cryptography, machine learning, and Oasis Labs. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So let me first introduce you to the audience. You graduated in Beijing. You obtained a PhD. You moved to America. First, you went to teach. You are a professor at Carnegie Mellon, but then from 2007 until today, you've also been a professor at UC Berkeley. And in addition to this, you became a world-renowned expert in a few very difficult fields: machine learning, cryptography, data privacy, and analytics. And a lot of people know you for your academic work and your research, but also more recently, a few years ago, you co-founded a company that is doing something about data privacy and allowing people to essentially being able to monetize their data and to control how their data is shared or used by other companies and other entities. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But before we go to the company that you co-founded, I wanted to spend some time with you to tell the audience a bit about your research, and especially given that you've been at Berkeley, UC Berkeley since 2007. Maybe you can tell us a bit about yourself and a bit about your research in the last years before we jump to another topic. So I'll let you take the stage.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. Right, I got my PhD degree at Berkeley as well, and then I have been a professor in computer science at UC Berkeley since 2007, and my research area has spanned across security and privacy, AI and machine learning, and so on. And in general, me and my research group, we really enjoy conducting cutting-edge research, in particular pushing forward the frontiers in these research domains and developing new technologies to help us solve important real-world problems. So the areas are actually really very varied and broad, given that I myself is a really curious person, and I just really love exploring new uncharted domains. So we can talk about security, privacy, AI, machine learning. So in security and privacy, I would say, of course, it's also a really important problem. My group, we have been developing new techniques and tools for ranging from actually detecting malicious codes like malware, both in binary programs, in web applications, in mobile applications. Actually, some of the technologies that I have led my group to develop in mobile security. So we actually did another startup earlier, automatically detecting vulnerabilities and malicious behaviors in mobile apps that was acquired by another security company earlier. So that was an example already for doing technology transfer from research to the real world. So that was a great experience. And also, of course, I've done a lot of work in cryptography, developing new cryptographic methods for doing secure computation, for example. So actually, one of my earlier work searching on encrypted data, essentially developing a new crypto method for enabling users to do searches with essentially encrypted data, so that the server can perform the search, like a keyword search and so on purely encrypted data without actually knowing what the search keyword is, and also without knowing the actual contents of the the text and so on. And the work also has won like a Test of Time awards, given that it was one of the first work actually in the space to enable searching on encrypted data and also in a very practical way, and has generated a lot of follow-up work. It's been a really active field since then. And then I also have a lot of interest in AI and machine learning, building intelligent machines. My group will have been doing a lot of work in both at the intersection of AI and security, figuring out how we can identify issues, security issues in AI and machine learning systems, and also how we can build machine learning, better machine learning methods that can have better generalization and so on. And also we have been doing work in program synthesis, teaching computers how to write code. I think that's also really exciting domain as well.
But please don't, otherwise I will be out of work soon. No, I'm just kidding, of course. But this is very interesting. Actually, it's very impressive, especially because those domains are related, but they are different. And being able to not only research, but produce useful techniques or useful algorithms, or let's say useful principles in different fields, even if they are correlated to some extent, is actually a very interesting accomplishment. So I'm a bit, in awe of what you managed to accomplish so far. But the interesting part, I think, is, or let's say the most relevant part in today's world, in 2020, is the fact that most of what you did is somehow related to privacy from different angles. Security, of course, is important to preserve privacy, but also the ability to query data without disclosing the data itself is another very important aspect that can allow systems to preserve privacy wherever possible. And we're going to talk about that when we go deeper into how Oasis Labs, the products created by Oasis Labs work. Before we talk about that, I just wanted to mention one more thing. In one of your interviews on Wired, I think, a year or two ago, you talked about the new privacy paradigm, or differential privacy, which suggests to me that privacy is also a concern of yours, something that you care about. Can you tell us a bit about the concept before we go to Oasis Labs and we talk about it?
The concept of privacy, is that what you're asking?
Not just privacy in general, but the new privacy paradigm that you were describing in that interview. What do you mean by that?
I see. Okay, right. So I think actually, so at Oasis, what we are focusing on is we call building a platform for a responsible data economy. It's actually even broader than just privacy. So let me explain what that means and why this is important. And this really, first of all, it's really motivated by some of the issues that we are seeing today. So as we all know that data is a key driver of modern economy, it's crucial for us to make better decisions and so on. But however, as we also know, a lot of this data is also really sensitive, and handling the sensitive data has posed tremendous challenges that I think people are really facing today, and it's even to a degree that I think it's really hinder the overall societal progress. So let me unpack that a little bit. So first, we see these challenges on both the individual user side as well as on the business side. So for individual users, I think users are really seeing that they're losing control of their data. They don't know what has happened to their data. So for example, a lot of users' data actually has been sold without users' knowledge, and usually under the premise umbrella of that the data has been anonymized by just simply removing some PI, like personally identifiable identifier type of information. But unfortunately, also as we know that this type of anonymization oftentimes is insufficient to protect the user's data privacy. So for example, New York Times had a really interesting article a while back showing that just by getting some of these anonymized mobility data, so basically data collected from users' mobile phones for their locations, but removed all the quote-unquote PI data, even with such anonymized data that a lot of people can get their hands on, either by paying for it or sometimes not even paying for it through different agreements and so on. Then they were able to identify the locations and essentially the movement of secret agents that works with President Trump. And from that, essentially, you can see the movements, essentially, of President Trump. And so this is just one example that this anonymization of data is really insufficient. And a lot of users, like the secret agent in this case, didn't know clearly that his location data has been sold or has been distributed to others. So, so this is just a very simple example, just the tip of the iceberg, showing that users are really losing control of their data. And also, as a consequence, also users more and more distrusting the services that they use. So, for example, I think people have heard about like the delete Facebook movement and many such movements and so on. And also at the same time, users are now getting direct benefit or sufficient direct benefit from these activities. For example, oftentimes users' data may be sold for a lot of money, in particular, for example, for their medical data. But users are not getting any direct either royalty or any portion of that. So that's on the user side. And on the business side, we also see the business side is suffering a lot as well. So first, they continue to suffer from large-scale data breaches. Even very high-profile businesses, they have been hacked, and attackers stole hundreds of millions of users' information, and sometimes even billions. And also, privacy regulations like GDPR, CCPA is a good first step, but we are seeing that it's becoming very cumbersome and expensive for businesses to comply with these regulations. And also, more importantly, it's still very difficult for businesses to utilize data. A lot of data is being locked up, is being stored in data silos, and cannot be really utilized due to privacy concerns and so on. And also there's a lot of controversies when data is being used in new forms. For example, there have been a lot of controversies about whether police should use facial recognition methods to try to search and identify potential criminals and so on. So, right. So these are all huge challenges that the whole society is facing from both sides, from individual user side and also from business side. And I feel that we, and just in general, we are at a point where all these challenges are hindering the societal progress. And we really need to develop new paradigms and new frameworks to help us address these challenges, to better utilize data, but also in a responsible way. And that's what I call responsible data economy, is that we want the data to help propel the economic growth, but also at the same time, we need to do it in a responsible way. And only in this way, we can actually make forward progress. And also it's really important to make this forward progress in a responsible way.
I completely agree with you. In fact, I think this is front and center to what's happening now in the tech industry because data is available more than ever. The amount of data, the details that are collected are essentially hundreds of data points because of our cell phones, because of our online presence, because we do more and more online. There is a huge amount of data collection. And of course, the complexity and the variability of this data is such that you cannot possibly think that you can manage these things with traditional technologies or just assign a few scripts or a few algorithms to deal with this. Because the problem is you either do not monetize or extract or create value from this data, or you do it improperly without respecting users' privacy or the user desire not to share specific areas of their data footprint. And in addition, what you mentioned, data breaches, when there is a data breach, of course, if the company being breached had your data exposed in plain text or essentially in a format that allows for the reading of that data, it means that from that point on, you can assume that your data, that particular data that was compromised, is compromised forever. In other words, if my social security number has been hacked, or let's say the company that was holding my social security number has been compromised, I can no longer feel that my social security number is ever safe, ever again. Because once that particular data is compromised, is essentially compromised forever. And this is why I'm very interested to discuss with you Oasis Labs, because the company you have built is essentially trying to give an answer to this problem by developing a different technology, a different solution in a way. Because otherwise, you can't simply say we're going to add more databases or more engineers or more police forces to the problem, because the data collection is growing exponentially. You need a technology, a new paradigm to be able to tackle this particular problem. So tell us how, in principle, Oasis Labs is trying to address this particular problem.
Okay. Yes, that's a very good question. So, right. So as I mentioned, I think we are at a point. It's actually there's a really urgent need for this new paradigm, of responsible data economy that enables data to be utilized actually more easily, but also in a more responsible way. And in order to do this, it actually needs a combination of technical and non-technical solutions, just because of the complexity nature of this. But at Oasis Labs, we mainly focus on the technical side, essentially building a new platform for a responsible data economy.
What would be...
And so let me...
sorry, let me interrupt you very quickly. What would be the simplest way to, even if it's reductive, but the simplest way to describe the technology that you have built so far?
Right, exactly. That's what I'm going to explain, what this platform for a responsible economy means. So essentially what it is, it's a combination of different component technologies that helps overall to achieve the goal to help users and data owners to essentially enforce their rights to data and better maintain control of their data and rights to data, and also at the same time to enable data to be utilized in a privacy-preserving way. So what this means is that we are actually building a platform that combines several different component technologies, including secure computing and differential privacy, and also blockchain technologies for this overall purpose. So let me again unpack this a little bit to talk about each component separately, to explain what they do and why they are important. So first, in terms of secure computing, the goal of secure computing is to protect the computation process from leaking sensitive information. So for example, if you do computing in an infrastructure that has been compromised, then in that case, the data, of course, can be stolen by the attacker and so on. So so it's important to do the computation in a secure way. Essentially, it's almost like computing over encrypted data. As an example that I mentioned earlier, my earlier work was on search on encrypted data, but more generally, you want to do general computation over encrypted data. So that's what we call secure computing, is that during the computation process, you can protect and ensure that the computation process won't leak sensitive information. And there are different methods to actually achieve this goal. The type of methods I mentioned earlier, using cryptographic methods, that's one approach. And it can be particularly effective for specific different types of computation of functions that you want to compute. But for more general computation, there's actually a new approach utilizing secure hardware. So this approach combines hardware and software solutions to essentially build. You can view it as a black box. We call it an isolated execution environment, such that when you do the computation inside this black box, this isolated execution environment, nothing outside of this box, including the operating system and the applications, they won't be able to see what's running inside, and they won't be able to modify what's running inside. And hence, this black box, this isolated execution environment, provides confidentiality and integrity of the computation and the data inside. So that's secure computing, which is a really important component technology to ensure that now what you can do is that you can run computation on a piece of data, but that's the only thing you can do. Normally, in today's world, when someone wants to use the data, they have to get a copy. They will get a copy of the data. And then once they get a copy of the data, they can actually do anything with the data.
Of course.
Essentially, users will lose control of their data once you give out a copy of your data. But the advantage of doing this computation over encrypted data and running the computation inside this black box, this isolated execution environment, is to ensure that the data will not be leaked outside of this black box or this isolated execution environment, and hence users will still have control over their data. So outside of this box, after this computation is done, whoever wants to use the data, they can now just, because they don't have a raw copy of the data, they can now easily reuse the data and so on.
Okay.
So that's one part of the technology. And another part I mentioned, differential privacy. This actually solves a different problem. The problem is, now let's say you have secure computing, you can ensure that the computation process doesn't leak sensitive information. But another important part is that you want to make sure that the computation result itself also doesn't leak sensitive information, at least not without the consent of users or the knowledge of the users. And because otherwise you can run a program inside this black box, this isolated execution environment that I mentioned earlier. It's also called a secure execution environment, and called, in technical terms, also called secure enclaves, TEs, trusted execution environment, and so on. So, because if someone can run a program inside this secure enclave, and what the program does is to just copy the data out, like it just copies the input into the output. Then the output contains a copy of the original inputs. And this is, of course, is a really, really simple way. You can actually have a very complex program that does this in a very stealthy way. So then in this case, you have now really protected the users' data privacy, and users will also lose control of their data once the program is run, because the program basically gets a copy of the data out of the secure enclaves. So then in this case, we need additional methods to protect the computation outputs, actually protects users' sensitive information, and also it complies with whatever users' original policies for how the data can be used. So, this also is a very complex problem, and one of the approaches to ensure that the computation output doesn't leak sensitive information about users' sensitive information. It's essentially using differential privacy. So differential privacy is a formal notion of privacy the actual, the technical explanation of different privacy can be a little complicated, but the idea is that if an algorithm or if a function is differentially private, then from just looking at the output of the computation results, the attacker won't be able to tell, for example, whether a particular user has been included in the original computation and hence protects the user's data privacy.
So for example, let me interrupt you just to make sure that I am following you, but also the audience is following you. Imagine, for example, that there is a query being run against a database. An example of differential privacy would be, tell me if I'm correct, to run an aggregation type of query of operation, which aggregates data from multiple rows and gives me maybe the result. And that type of result is something that would not compromise the privacy of the individual row, assuming that in that case, an individual row is related to one individual in the real world. Is that an example of how you would implement differential privacy?
Right, that's one example. And in this case, the result you get actually is not the, will actually have some perturbation added to the results, so that this way it adds some randomization and prevents the attacker from learning sensitive information about individual users. And also how much perturbation to add also depends on the computation you are doing and the nature of the data set and so on.
Okay, I have a very specific question about this. I'm very interested in database technology. It's one of my bias from my early days in computer science. Imagine I have an existing database and I'm a company. I have a database with users' data and I decide to adopt one of the products that Oasis Labs have developed to provide not only confidential computing, but also differential privacy. Would the content of my database change, or would only the computation that happens when I query the database be affected with randomization and aggregation and those things?
Okay, yeah, that's a very good question. So the content of the database will not change. And also, the technology that we have been developing is very easy to deploy, so that you actually don't need to change anything about the database either. And what we do is that we actually do automatic query rewriting, so that we can automatically embed the differential privacy mechanism into the original query, and to make it a differentially private query, so that even the data analyst doesn't need to know the details of differential privacy, because it's actually quite complex. And then, essentially we add a layer in front of the database to automatically rewrite the query to add differential privacy mechanism into it, so that the generated results the query results will be differentially private, but the database content will not be changed.
Got it. And you can do this
so
because you control the computation, and therefore, whenever a query is requested, you intercept that request before it hits the database. You adjust the query accordingly. Then the new query is executed on the database. And you know that that new query has essentially been granted the features, the characteristics of differential privacy, because you did those operations to the query. So essentially, as long as you can control the computation, you can ensure and enforce that differential privacy is maintained across the board.
Right, exactly.
Got it.
And so this way it's really easy to deploy. And we've had some, we have been working with the enterprise partners in piloting the technology.
And let's take one step further now. Imagine that I am the company, I implemented this, and now I have the advantage and the possibility to provide I don't know if it's correct to call it anonymized data. Maybe for lack of better word, we can call it anonymized data. What is the main benefit that your customers, because you have customers already using your product, and maybe you can tell us a bit more about it. What are the main benefits that they experience once they implement your technology in their systems?
That's a very good question. So in the past, I think people have the issue of all or nothing. Is that either they allow their data analysts to have access to the database, then the data analyst basically essentially can see everything, or they don't give them access at all, then they can't do their work. So this way actually provides a really good way that in general you can have the analysts to have access to use the data, but you can also ensure that users' data privacy is being protected.
Got it.
And the protection can be very strong. So this way it makes it easier for analysts to be able to do their job, and also the company doesn't need to worry about any insider attacks or any issues with their user privacy being breached.
Got it. And so,
right. So
oh no, go ahead. If you needed to add something, please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Oh, so right. So I want to step back a little bit. So this is another component technology that I mentioned. It's basically, so far I talked about secure computing and differential privacy. So this allows allows us to protect the computation process from leaking sensitive information, and also the computation outputs from leaking sensitive information, and also the computation itself to comply with the user's policy. We have actually richer policies, but for interest of time, we don't have time to talk about that. But I do want to mention another important component technology is blockchain distributed ledger. So in this case, I believe that it's really important to really establish the notion of users' data rights, and helping users and data owners in general to enforce their data rights and maintain control of their data and their rights to data. For a number of reasons. So one, just to give you an analogy or an example. So property rights, for example, actually didn't just exist from the very beginning. And especially the enforcement of property rights, it took a long time to really be set up and so on. So what happened is that in the actually fairly recent past, once the property rights framework was set up, and also more importantly the enforcement framework was set up, then what we have seen is that property rights has really become a cornerstone of modern economy and has really propelled modern economic growth. So, but of course, before the digital age, properties are the most valuable assets of individuals and entities and so on. And hence property rights, is almost like one of the most important rights. However, now as we step into the digital age and going forward, as we all know, the whole world is only moving more and more into the digital world, like having almost like this parallel digital world. And then our data, and also as we discussed at the very beginning, more and more data is being produced and being collected, and this is essentially exponential growth. And also we have more and more compute power to utilize the data and so on. And the data economy itself is growing exponentially as well. And hence, but now we are at a point where it's like, long time ago, early on, we don't have a proper framework to talk about rights to data and who should decide and control of rights for data and so on. So first of all, this is a huge open question. I think it's really important for the society, both for technologists and even more so for non-technologists, and including regulators and so on, to really explore this and set up a proper framework for data rights. And in parallel to that, what the blockchain distributed ledger is great at is you can actually provide a decentralized manner to provide this immutable log of users' rights to data, for example. The blockchain distributed ledger can provide immutable logs for many things, and one of the, I think, most important things would be to provide an immutable log for users or data owners' rights to data and how they want their data to be utilized. And also when we combine blockchain with secure computing and these privacy technologies, then really this combination can be really important for enforcing the data rights also. So on one hand, the blockchain distributed ledger help provide this immutable log of users' rights to data and the policies of how their data to be used. And then the secure execution environments can enable data to be utilized in the secure environment, so that even when the data has been used, users can still maintain control of their data and rights to data. And also the blockchain in this case can provide an immutable log of how user data has been utilized as well, and hence really provides an end-to-end solution and end-to-end flow for users' rights to data, how their data is used and can be used, and so on.
This is good. In fact, it reminds me of, imagine with physical property, imagine a field. One thing is to know who owns the field, but also another thing is to know who can work the field to produce, corn or grain or something. And there's a lot of parallels between this, example, which is something that has happened for centuries in the history of the world, and the fact that we're now talking about digital property and digital data, and not only ownership, but also usage. Who gets to use and essentially monetize that data, for how long, and who gets paid for that usage, who collects rent for being able to use that particular property data, digital data. And I think there's a lot of parallels there, but you're right, absolutely right, in the fact that the structure that we have in the world until recently didn't have this problem to solve for data related to people, related to transactions, related to many of the data points that are being collected. And you are essentially saying, tell me if I'm wrong, that having a blockchain allows to have a decentralized ledger that can act as the ultimate judge and the ultimate proof of specific transactions and specific agreements being made between parties related to how certain data can be used, can be rented out in a way, or can be even taken back from the owner once the owner decides, I no longer want my data to be utilized by companies. Is that right?
Right, exactly. Right, it's a very good point. And also, again, by combining blockchain and secure computing, these privacy technologies, that's when we can also ensure that even when data is being utilized, we can still enforce the data use policies and ensure the protection of users' data privacy and so on. And another thing I want to mention is the use of blockchain, like you mentioned, it can really provide a lot of great capabilities to help, for example, also as you talk about the notion of users can rent out their data, and in this case, for the payments, and also, for example, if users' data has been used in training a machine learning model, and the machine learning model in the end can make a profit, then the blockchain actually can help with this automatic distribution of the generated profit. For example, blockchain has this notion of smart contracts that can be executed automatically, and also the execution is ensured its correctness, even in this decentralized manner. So it can provide great capability for these kind of things. And also, on blockchain, we can also set up these we call data DAOs. So essentially, these are decentralized autonomous organizations that can be governed by these smart contracts. They can govern how the data can be used, and if users agree to this use policy, they can join this data DAO. And as we also can call it like a data trust, and so on. And essentially, this enables us to really pool users' data or different data owners' data all together. For example, in medical space, it would be amazing if we could actually pool users' data, healthcare data, into such a data trust that can provide medical data to medical researchers to do their research.
While maintaining privacy of the individuals, of course.
Right, while still protecting users' privacy. Then I think this will be a huge game changer to medical research and to society and so on.
Absolutely, and it's very timely to say this in 2020 when
exactly,
when we know what's going on. Absolutely. I have before I wanted to dive into something that you just said earlier, but before we do that, maybe we'll take one step back, because we described what Oasis Lab does and what it builds, and the general principles, these three components that you have described. Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Okay. One thing I think maybe let me just also step back and then to put these together. I mentioned three components. There's another component that I actually didn't have time to mention. It's people also talk about like federated learning and federated analytics, but essentially, for the platform that we are building, that I call this platform for responsible data economy, actually combines these different components. Again, with the blockchain distributed ledger to provide this immutable log of users' rights to data and their policies to data and how the data has been used. And also, when I talk about this privacy computing technologies, you can view it as it's also a distributed computing framework. We call it a distributed computing fabric. So the actual computation could also happen in a distributed manner in this federated setting as well. So that's altogether we built, I call a distributed computing fabric to enable this, to enable data to be utilized in a responsible, privacy-preserving way.
I have to tell you something funny. So I love the name, and there is a reason. 3.5 years ago, 4 years ago now, I co-founded a company called Fabrica, and the name is inspired by fabric. And the company built a platform based on blockchain to digitize real estate assets, so titles, in the US only to start. And I left the company after about 2 years. The company is still going very strong, and I'm very happy with the progress. But it's interesting that I thought, we thought when we founded the company that there would be this fabric that would allow essentially these data to be not only collected and organized, but also managed by structures put on top, which is, I think, very similar in concept to what you were describing now, despite Fabrica, the company, was focused on physical property, like land property, houses, which is not your case. You are focused on data, right? But I love the name, and of course, I was thinking along the same lines when we were thinking of a name for the company. But this part aside, it's interesting that you mentioned this, but I think it's useful now for the audience to get a sense of the company, Oasis Labs. So you started the company a few years ago. You received investments from Andreessen Horowitz, Axel, Cota Capital. How big is the company today, and where are Oasis Labs employees based? Are they all in America? Are they all around the world? How big is the team? Tell us a bit about the company now.
Okay. Yes. So the company has about 30 people, and we are mainly based in the Bay Area, but also it's a distributed team. We have team members in Europe as well, and so on.
Nice. And I know that recently there was the Mainnet launch, and it's important to clarify that there is a decentralized aspect at play there. So it is not controlled by Oasis Labs, but Oasis Labs is essentially one of the participants in this Mainnet launch. Maybe it's important to share with the audience. You have to assume the audience is technical to most extent, but maybe not well versed with crypto. So what is a Mainnet launch, and tell us about your Mainnet launch that happened recently.
I see. Okay, great. Right. So I can talk about right. So this is on the blockchain side.
Yes.
So I can talk about this decentralized network, and also I can also talk about a use case.
Yes.
Given that we've talked about the different component technologies, building a platform for a responsible data economy, and we have some really exciting use cases that I can share with the audience as well.
Yeah, that would be great.
Mm-hmm. So, right. So in terms of the blockchain side, given that, as I mentioned, we need to have a immutable, a distributed ledger, a blockchain to help essentially it's an important foundation for this responsible data economy, and also just in general as a decentralized like blockchain platform. So from that, so Oasis Labs is only is building the technology. It's a technology essentially, provider and creator for this. But of course, the network itself is decentralized. It's and also even for the technology itself, we have the Oasis Labs is only, like you said, only a participant to that, and there actually have been a vibrant ecosystem, a big community with a lot of other developers, other entities contributing to the overall technologies for the network as well, including various toolings and so on. So it's really not just Oasis Labs, there's many other participants as well. And what the network does is, I guess people are familiar with like Bitcoin and Ethereum and so on. So Bitcoin, I think most people understand. It's it's a decentralized blockchain network. But Bitcoin, in terms of functionality that it provides and the computation you can do is limited on the Bitcoin network. And mainly you can do payments, you can do transactions, but if you want to do more complex computation, it has certain limitation. And for Ethereum, some people may be familiar with Ethereum, which is a smart contract platform. But Ethereum platform itself also has certain limitations. For example, it has a lot of scalability issues. It has a low throughput, and right now it's really hitting a bottleneck for scalability to the extent that actually transactions on the Ethereum network can be very expensive as a gas fee. And also it doesn't have any privacy protection. All the transactions on the Ethereum network is all in the clear and in plain text. And hence, for a lot of the applications that need to protect users' privacy, it has many challenges on the Ethereum network. So with the platform that we have been building out in general in this ecosystem, essentially we are building a new generation of a blockchain platform that has greater scalability and privacy protection. And the privacy protection includes the privacy technologies that I mentioned earlier, such as secure computing and so on. And also the underlying blockchain platform itself has a new scaling architecture that can provide much greater scalability than previous blockchain platform solutions. So with these new capabilities, we hope that this can actually serve as a more scalable and solid foundation for building a responsible data economy, and also more broadly for open finance, open data, and so on. And the launch of this network, this decentralized network, will be soon. The testnet for this network has been going for quite some time, has been very successful, and has seen great participation globally. And like I said, it's actually already like a decentralized network with many nodes running on the network, and so on. So I'm also really excited about the Mainnet Launch that will be coming up soon. That the community will come together to decide when to launch the network, and the plan is soon. And looking forward to the launch of this decentralized network.
Nice, thank you. And what do you think is the biggest misconception that people have when they look at Oasis Labs? Maybe they discover Oasis Labs for the first time. They read the documentation, or they read some of the examples. Or actually, if you don't want to answer this one, maybe you were mentioning earlier that you wanted to share some use cases.
Oh, right.
So maybe by sharing the use cases, you can shed some light on what are the ways in which companies are using the products that you've been building. And of course, this is related not just to the blockchain, but to all the components that you were describing earlier.
Right. So let me give you a concrete example use case. So I talked about building a responsible data economy. And also, actually, another thing I wanted to mention is that this platform, as part of building a responsible data economy, it actually can be very useful in creating a new type of assets that we call data assets. So essentially, by allowing users and data owners to better control their data and rights to data, essentially you can create a new form of asset that we call data assets, so that users can decide how the asset should be used, and then they can gain benefit from the asset. And then when we talk about data and data assets, then there are many different types and different forms of data. And one type that's in this concrete use case that I want to mention is in the genomic setting, essentially our genomic data. So as we all know, genomic data is hugely sensitive. And also, as you mentioned earlier, even with other form of data, once you leak, you cannot take it back. And then in this case, also once you leak it, you cannot change it.
Yes, or until CRISPR-Cas9 becomes widespread.
Sure.
We're not going to change our DNA anytime soon.
Right. So hence genomic data is really important for individual users in terms of privacy, and also at the same time it's hugely valuable. Right. So for example, pharmaceutical companies may want to use genomic data to develop better drugs. And also for users themselves, they may want to get different genomic analytics to learn more about themselves. And hence, now we see this tension that on one hand, the data is really sensitive. On the other hand, there is a lot of need to utilize the data. And previously, there's no solution to help users to really become owners of their data and maintain control of their genomic data. So with the technology, this Oasis platform, they and in partnership with other genomic companies, for the first time, we actually can enable users to become owners of their genomic data and maintain control of their genomic data, while at the same time to enable their data to be utilized still and in a privacy-preserving way. And this product and service has been launched on the Oasis platform and currently in beta. And we already have many users who have signed up for this, and we would love, for the audience who are interested in signing up for this. So one place you can try this out is at Nebula Genomics. It's a genomic company which provides full genome sequencing and analytics results. So in this case, right, so users can decide, to give consent to Nebula Genomics to run their genomic analytics on users' data. And in that case, with the consent, then the genomic company can run their genomic analysis in this in the secure execution environment provided by the Oasis platform. And so then the users can ensure that their data is being protected and still maintain control of their data, because then the data cannot be used for other purposes and so on. And so this is a concrete example how this type of technology can really change the paradigm. Because before, for example, for other genomic companies, users actually have friends telling me that they were very concerned about using services provided by, in general, these other genomic companies, because once they give their data, it's very hard for them to then maintain control of their data.
Yes.
But in this case, users can maintain control of their data, and also they will know actually when their data is being used and how it's being used. So we hope that this can be a paradigm shift in terms of users better maintaining control of their data.
Absolutely. And one last thing I have for you before we wrap up our podcast today. Given that you mentioned the blockchain and several aspects of the blockchain, what is it, in your view, the most important innovation that has happened in the crypto space, in the blockchain space in 2020? Because we had many things in 2019, 2018. What do you think is the biggest one in 2020?
Okay, so I wouldn't say the innovation happened in 2020, but I think it certainly has become a much bigger scale in terms of impact in blockchain and crypto world, is the people call it the DeFi, Decentralized Finance. So it's a very interesting, innovative use that the smart contract can really enable. As on this blockchain, essentially you have different types of assets. And from these assets, and with the smart contracts, you can provide essentially most of the different traditional financial services. You can do them on this decentralized blockchain smart contract platforms, and you can do it in a very different way, given that there is no central party to control it, and it's completely open. Essentially, it made it also really easy to build new applications. Because one way to think of it is almost like you have all the open APIs. That for traditional financial services, you need to, for example, ask the bank to provide the APIs and so on. Otherwise, it's very difficult for a third party to develop a new financial application. But on the decentralized smart chain platform, essentially the assets are there, and all the smart contracts are there. That's why I say you can view it as having all open APIs. So it's very easy for new applications to be built, and also it's a new field. I think also it's called computational finance. It's different from the traditional term, I think, computational finance. So in this case, it's more like now the finance it's really being done purely as computations on these decentralized smart contract platforms,
Yes.
Which has been really exciting. I can give you some concrete examples. So people may be familiar with exchanges where different parties, they can come together, buy and sell different types of assets. And traditionally, these exchanges have been run in centralized ways. Called centralized exchanges, for example, Coinbase is a very good example of the biggest crypto exchange in the US. So on these decentralized smart contract platforms, you can also build actually these exchanges, but they are decentralized. So they are called DEX, so decentralized exchanges. And you can have parties there to trade their assets. But actually some are done in a different way called automated market making. I won't have time to go into the details of that. But essentially you can view it as a new form of decentralized exchange. And it was very interesting that whereas centralized exchange, for example, for Coinbase, has raised a lot of venture capital, has a huge team to build up the solution. But whereas, for example, on these decentralized smart contract platforms like Ethereum, these decentralized exchange, like one of the best known ones called UniSwap, it was developed by a very, very small team, not much venture capital in the beginning. It actually, right, with a very small team, they actually was able to build such a successful exchange that during a certain period of time actually surpassed the trading volume of Coinbase. So this is how different they, and also Uniswap was developed in a relatively short time period.
Yes, I was going to add that because Uniswap did not exist 7-8 months ago, pretty much. So it's a very recent thing, and it just skyrocketed in usage in just a few months.
Right. I think the project itself exists even before then, but really in terms of the actual...
the actual... absolutely. I mean,
right.
Let's call it the official launch, for lack of a better term.
Right.
Absolutely.
So that's a great example showing the power of these decentralized network and decentralized smart contract platforms. And also, this also is an interesting application domain for the Oasis technology as well, in the sense that so these are like decentralized finance, open finance, but right now we are seeing a lot of challenges because of the scalability challenges and also the lack of privacy protection on the, for example, Ethereum platform.
Yes.
Whereas with the Oasis technology, we provide much greater scalability and also privacy protection. And also, as I mentioned, with the unique capabilities, the Oasis technology can enable new forms of assets, like data assets. So this also can help the open finance to grow in new dimensions as well, that we call open data, to really bring the data economy into new levels, to both enable a responsible data economy and also a much more vibrant this open finance, open data.
Nice. Well, thanks a lot for your insights. It has been a pleasure to speak with you today. And of course, if people want to know more about you or Oasis Labs, there will be some links in the show notes so they can follow up with you. And for now, it's all for today. Thanks again, and hope to see you in person again soon once the emergency is over. So thank you very much for your time today.
Great. Yeah, thank you. It's a great pleasure being here. Thank you.
Thank you.